God created the world in 6 days. On day one, he created light and dark. On day two, he separated the earth from the atmosphere. On day three, he created dry land and plants. On day four, he created the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything that fills space. On day five, he created the fish and the birds. And on day six, he created land animals and us, man. Everything was good for a while until there's a train. But everything was good for a while until Adam and Eve decided to disobey God and eat the fruit that the serpent offered them. And this allowed not only sin but death to enter the world. Things got so bad that God actually had to destroy the world with a flood, saving only Noah and his family. A few years later, God calls Abraham to go and leave his house and his life, and he promises that he will make a great nation of his disciples. He also promises Abraham that he will have a son, and this is important because Abraham's wife couldn't have kids. And Abraham knew that, so he kind of went against God in a way and had a son with his servant. But God didn't really like that, so he does show his faithfulness, and his barren wife does have a son. And because Abraham went against God, there was conflict between the two sons and their descendants. So Abraham's son that God promised him, whose name is Isaac, and Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob has 12 sons when he gets older. And his favorite son, which was his youngest at the time, his name is Joseph, and he was sold into slavery by his brothers in Egypt. But he rises up to power in Egypt and becomes second in command. And because of that, he is able to save his family and the entire nation of Egypt from famine. But centuries later, Joseph's family's descendants are now a nation, and they're actually enslaved in Egypt by Pharaoh. And God calls Moses to lead them out. Moses was found by Pharaoh's daughter in a basket in the river, and she took him as her own, and Moses grew up in Egyptian royalty. But when Moses becomes an adult, he sees a Hebrew getting beaten by an Egyptian, and this enrages him so much that he actually looks to his left and his right and sees that no one is watching him and kills the Egyptian. But realizing what he's done, he flees into the desert, and there he has an encounter with God, and God says, go and get the people out. And for a while he didn't really want to, but eventually he agrees, and him and his brother Aaron actually rescue the Israelites from Egypt. But after this, they didn't really have anywhere to go, because the promised land, they couldn't go in yet. So they wandered the desert for a while, and Moses dies, and Joshua takes over. And then after Joshua, God calls up temporary leaders called judges, and they guide the people for a while. But the people tire of this, and they want a king. So God calls Saul, then David, then Solomon to be kings of Israel. But people begin to rebel. They don't really like the kings anymore, and the kingdom actually divides into the north kingdom of Israel and the south kingdom of Judah, and the people pretty much just turn away from God. God calls up prophets to warn about the future, and if the Israelites don't change their behavior, that bad things are going to happen. But they don't listen, and bad things happen. They end up being conquered by their enemies, and for a long time, things just get really, really bad. But after this, the narrative kind of jumps ahead a little bit, and Jesus is born, and he is awesome and lives the perfect life. He fulfills every prophecy given about the Messiah in the Old Testament, and just does everything that we as humans are supposed to do. During his life, he calls 12 men to kind of travel with him and be his friends, and he teaches them, and those are called the disciples. But the people in political power, they begin to notice that Jesus has a following, and they don't really like that because that kind of that takes away their power, because the people are putting power to God and not to them. And the hate actually gets so bad that the people kill Jesus and they crucify him on a cross. But this is where it gets good, because 3 days later, he rises up out of the grave and conquers sin and death. And because of that, there's no more need for sacrifices. And after this, after he comes back, he tells his disciples to go and make disciples of all the nations. And that's what they do. And that leads all the way up to today, what we're still doing, making disciples of everyone and telling everyone about what happened.